Adding interactivity to Animate is all about manipulating objects. If you haven't done so already, go ahead and open the starter file box_start.fla. If you look at this document, we can get some information about it by simply going to the publish settings. And then that's one way to look at it. It tells us basically that we're working with HTML5 and Canvas, and so what we'll be doing is using JavaScript, and I'll talk a little bit about the different types of scripting that you can do or accomplish with Adobe Animate depending on the project. But as I was saying, adding interactivity is all about manipulating objects. Up to this point, you've manipulated objects using the timeline and the workspace within Adobe Animate. So this box is an object. What type of object is it? Well, if we click on it, and if we want to get some information like looking in the library, we can see that this is a movie clip. Adobe Animate has three main types of symbols or objects. You can think of these as classes. They're either graphics, movie clips, or buttons. And adding interactivity is basically accessing these objects and listening for some type of event and then having something occur. Up to this point, what we've done is we've manipulated these objects with the timeline and with various panels, and via abstraction that's built into Animate, we can do things like manipulate an object's property. Like, for example, if I drill down and I manipulate this object, the box itself, where I'm editing the movie clip, I can go ahead and change the color from green to, let's say, red. And so I'm changing its property by doing that, and that's all handled for us automatically in Adobe Animate. If I wanted to use a motion tween, I could change its position, or I can change its position over keyframes, and that's all handled by Adobe Animate. For example, we can see here that as we move the box around and we open up the properties panel, that we see the change in X and Y coordinates. So if we go back to the main scene, then we pretty much have the object or this box as it originally was. And what we're going to do is we're going to use some scripting and learn a little bit about scripting to manipulate the object. Before we take a dive into and a brief look at JavaScript, let's take a look at some of the resources that you can use that Adobe provides in terms of scripting. The first one is how to use ActionScript with Animate. As you might know, in 2020, roughly 2020, Flash will be going away, so Shockwave won't be supported by the browser unless you absolutely tell it to. Adobe will eventually move away from that format. However, if you go to this link that I provide in Canvas, you'll learn the basics of using the code wizard for ActionScript. ActionScript is based on ECMAScript, which is very similar to JavaScript. And so if you learn the basics of it and review the information here, and we're going to go over it together, it gives you an idea of how to script ActionScript, primarily using the Actions panel and the Actions code wizard. HTML5 Canvas is one standard for the web for creating animations, and we've talked about Canvas and working in the Canvas tag within a web page, and the APIs that allow you to generate and create dynamic and interactive content. And so this page, create and publish HTML5, Canvas Documents and Animate talks about what that is and as well how to add interactivity to an HTML5 document, which uses basically JavaScript, which looks similar to ActionScript, and we'll talk about what this means here. When we're using HTML5 Canvas with Adobe Animate, it uses a JavaScript library to grab its code snippets and snippets of code, and that's based on what's in the Create.js library. And this is a very robust library. Libraries are basically pre-configured code that you can use to add interactivity and to animate elements within Adobe Animate, or even outside of Animate. You can use the Create.js libraries. And there are basically four main libraries. Ease.js, which handles most of our easing and smoothing, if you will, within and between our states and frames and animations. Tween.js, which is the engine that provides and controls our actual animation. Sound.js for working with sound, and then Preload.js for preloading your content. And there are videos within this page and the previous page that help you understand it. And again, we're going to go over it a little bit today. And then the last resource is adding interactivity with code snippets, and how to use the code snippets panel to locate and add snippets. And this is when you start to feel more comfortable with scripting by hand, or manually, if you will. You can throw the code snippets in there, and that helps to speed up the process. And so you have ActionScript and the Actions panel and the wizard. If you're working with HTML5 Canvas, you have the same wizard to help you, as well as code snippets. So let's take a brief look at working with JavaScript. This is by no means a lesson on JavaScript. I'll give you some resources on W3 Schools, and that should get you through. But this just will give you an idea of what's going on when we're working with JavaScript and objects. So what we've done up to this point with Animate is we've used the timeline and things like motion tweening and shape tweening to change properties and position on the objects. And in order, you have the ability to actually do that manually. You can actually have, and in fact, you might see some Adobe Animate projects that have just one frame, just a single frame, and all kinds of animations are going on within the stage or within the project, and it's all scripted manually. Now, is that the best use of Animate? No. The best use is a combination of working with the timeline and scripting. And so the scripting is that it uses is JavaScript. So let's take a look at how we use JavaScript to work with objects. And so you can think of an object as a thing, and all objects have properties and methods. Properties are things like changing its color and its position, and then animating or moving is a method. So think of a method as a verb. We're telling it to do something. So let's look at the basics of that and how that might look with JavaScript. Let's bring up Actions, and I kind of like to work with the Actions panel floating, right? And so it does take up space. If you want, you can dock it, but it still takes up a lot of real estate. So what I like to do is kind of resize it, because you don't really need all of this, and you can scroll down as your code grows. One of the first things that we need to understand is that JavaScript is about objects, and so in terms of scripting, objects can be primitive or complex. So primitives are things like simple strings and numbers, or complex objects like our movie clips and our buttons that have properties and methods that we can manipulate and change based on events. And it's primarily based on an event like the movie loading or someone clicking or dragging, that something changes within the animation. And that's where we have interactivity, like clicking on that next button and then going from one frame to the next. But let's look at some of these objects to start with. So when we're coding, it's a good idea to add comments. So let's create a variable. Let's var creates a variable, to contain objects. Now, we're not going to do it so much in this case. Is not the best example, but I want to keep it simple so that you can see. So this is when we type / and text, and we're adding a comment, and what that does is it's ignored by the interpreter in the browser, but it's there for us for coding purposes or whatever. JavaScript or the browser or Animate will ignore the white space, and so what we're going to do is we're going to create a variable. You can think of a variable as a box. It contains objects, and we can put objects in and out, things like text. So within this variable or container named messages, we're going to put the text hello animate, and what we're going to do later is we're going to change that text from a string, and so we're going to add another comment, and notice that the coding in the code here, the var keyword and the variable name, that there's code highlighting, and it's colorized so that we can see that it's highlighted. So what we're going to do is we add a comment to say this is a string. A string is basically text. It's a very primitive type of object, and we're going to create this string. We're going to get Animate to display it, and then when it's done, then we're going to change it from a string to a number. So this is the basics. So this is a statement in JavaScript. The keyword, which is var in this case, the variable name, the equal sign, which basically means set to. It's not equal. The actual equal sign would look something like this, double equal. So this means set. So when you see one equal sign, that means we're setting the value in the box to this object, which is a string right now. And the next thing what we'll do is we're going to create basically a function and an event handler that will, based on something happening within, based on us clicking the box, something happening within the stage or within the movie clip, then we have a function which is repetitive code that will display something in the movie. So let's go to the next line. I like to use white space. Again, it ignores the white space. So let's add another comment. What we're going to do is we're going to create an event handler to call a function if the user clicks the box. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to create a handler, and a handler includes a couple of things. It includes an event listener, and then the handler is basically based on what this event listener hears, then it calls the handler or a function which then executes some code. So that's pretty simple. So you can think of it as object method. The object is the box. So let me go ahead and collapse this. This is why I kind of like to float it. It's the box. The object is this box movie clip, and the event will be click. So we'll listen for the event. So it's an event listener, and it listens for the click, and then it calls the function. So it handles the function. And so what that looks like is kind of freaky at first, but don't worry about it. This is a lot to take in. You can script it manually, and I'll show you how to do that a little bit later, but using the code wizard. But what we'll do is we'll use what's called the this keyword, which is object. And so look how we get code hinting here. So object.box underscore movie clip. Do you recognize that? That's the name of the box. That actual box. We named it box underscore movie clip. And we want to add an event listener. And now I'm typing everything manually, and I don't know why it's not showing us and giving me more hints, but let's just go ahead and type it. We're going to add an event listener, and I'm a terrible typer. typist, should I say. Okay, so we're going to add an event listener, open parentheses, and so this is basically a method or a function, if you will, and the event that this event listener is listening for is a click. And we put that in double quotes, comma, and what we want it to do is to call the function. The function is called box talk, and we're going to write that function. Close parentheses, boom. So this is a built-in method, and so what we're saying is this box movie clip for this object box movie clip, add an event listener that listens for an event, and that event, which are the arguments here within this method or function, is the event is click, and then we want it to call a function named box talk. The only thing we need to do, and we're doing this manually, you'll see a little bit later that Animate will help you do this, and you don't have to type all this, is create a function to display a message when box underscore MC movie clip is clicked. And so that's just a comment, because it's good to comment because it reminds us what we did, or either if someone else looks at this code, then they'll know what it does. So a function is repetitive code. It's a block of code or statements that every time an event occurs, you can call that function. So it's reusable code. And we create a function by using the function keyword, and what our function is going to be called is box talk. That's why it's here. So this, we're going to make the box talk. So box talk, open parentheses, so we know that we have a function, close, and then close bracket, open bracket, and then close bracket. And so everything here is where your code goes. So what happens is we created a variable, and this is hello animate. What we want it to do is that when someone clicks on the box, we want this function to grab what's in this variable and then display it in a dialog box, sometimes called an alert window or alert method in dialog box. So what I'll do is I'm going to use another method called alert, and that's built into the window object, which is in the browser, and we'll say alert method, which we're passing this alert method. It's also, we can also type window.alert. We're passing it this message as an argument, which is right here, hello animate. We could easily change it to and just put that text there, but then it would be locked into the function, and we can't change the argument, if you will. And so this kind of shows an okie way of doing that. And so what we wanted to do is we want to show alert message, and then we want to change the message. So it's first going to show the message which says hello animate, and then what we wanted to do is we want to change the message. So we're saying, okay, take that messages variable. So, and I named it messages here, and it should be message. I don't know why I did that. So we want to take that message and we want to set it to a new string, which basically says that the message is now the number 5. And so to save time, I'm going to just paste that in there, and that's a lot. Let me scratch it. What it does is it says, okay, first it's going to display the original message, hello animate. Then we're going to create a new message that basically says, hey, the message is now the number 5. So we changed it from a string to a number, and to prove it, the last thing we want to do is we want to show that value. So we can type window.alert and message, and so it's going to show it basically what this will do is this will display 5, and this guy is going to display Hello Animate. Now you might think, oh, this commenting should be obvious, right? But when you get to the point when you're ready to code manually, it kind of helps you so that you remind yourself what your stuff is supposed to do. And now if we go ahead and we save our work, we can collapse the wizard. And now if we go, and let's just go ahead and move this out of the way. It's so tiny, it's hard to move. If we go to control and then test, we get the obligatory warning, right? Blah, 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 blah. On output, that's just standard. Now if we click on this box, we get this dialog. It says, Hello Animate. So now it's displaying that string, right? And if I click OK, it's going to say, hey, message is now the number 5. So the message is now the number 5. And I click OK, and then we're done. And so that's pretty simple, but what we did is we took a look at how to create, and notice how that function, every time I click, it just calls that function. It listens for the click, and it will do all that stuff it was supposed to do, and it does it over and over and over, and it just keeps calling that function. Now it's not going to reload it step by step. It's just going to, because it's going to execute the code line by line. And so after it's done, and it's done that, basically all it's going to do is call this function. And so we can see with scripting, we can do a lot manually and to enhance our animate movies. And this has been a long video, and there's a little bit to watch over the next few weeks. But once you get it, you'll get it, and this will help a whole lot with your coding both in and outside of Adobe Animate and adding interactivity to your web pages.